Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Wish you a Chag Sameach to Rabbi Feinstein. What a beautiful teaching. It's not every rabbi that could take a book as complex as the book of Job and give us all of the major ideas in less than 30 minutes. I'm just astounded by his scholarship, as I always am, and how relevant it was. So a Chag Sameach to him as well. Tom, again, thank you very much for bringing us to this space. And it's a pleasure now to turn to one of my great friends and wonderful colleagues, Rabbi Cheryl Peretz, for her presentation and teaching this evening. Rabbi Cheryl Peretz has served as one of the deans of the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies in Los Angeles for more than 20 years, teaching, counseling, and advising and programming a wonderful set of students who are now our colleagues. Her work lives through her and into our communities every single day of the year, bringing Torah and revelation to all of us. So we're so grateful to you, Rabbi Peretz, for your ongoing work and also for your presentation this evening, Counting Time and Making Time Count. Thanks for being here, and we're looking forward to your teaching.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Blumenthal, and wonderful to be with all of you this evening. And Chag Sameach, I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, where it's not yet the holiday, but delighted that we can share a little bit of this time together and to learn with one another. I do want to just acknowledge as we get ready to learn today that I know that for so many of us, our hearts and our minds are in the East, and as we learn and as we try to hear Torah this year, I hope and pray that we can also pray that our words, our Torah is lifted towards the heavens and can help bring peace for the world and especially for the Middle East. We've been spending the last 7 weeks counting time. And for some of us, that's actually not so new this year because we've been counting the days that we've been in this crazy time of the pandemic and in our homes and eagerly anticipating when we can get out and about. And but I wanted us to think about why we're counting time during the Omer and what it really all means and what it has to do with this connection to Shavuot. So I have a source sheet and I think it's supposed to be shared, I hope, and brought up. Thank you. Great. And I'm going to start with these two verses, two sections from the Torah, which are really the two places where the Torah talks about the counting of the Omer. From the second night of Passover, for 7 weeks, 7 full weeks, we count the days and the weeks. And here's where we're told to do that, right? The Torah says, "Uspartem lachem mimacharat haShabbat." From the day on which you bring the sheep, the elevation offering, that's the Passover, the day after the Sabbath, right? Meaning after the first day of Pesach, you shall count off 7 weeks. They must be complete. You must count until the day after the 7th week, 50 days. Then you shall bring an offering of new grain to the Lord. Right? So we don't just count, I mean, this is where we get that we count both the days and the weeks, right? We're counting 7 full weeks and 50 days. It's on this 50th day that we are bringing this new offering is in the word of the Torah to God. And likewise, in Devarim, it tells us you shall count off 7 weeks. Start to count the 7 weeks when the sickle is first put to the standing grain. I want to point out a couple of things here. The first, if you notice, is that according to the Torah, the biggest connection of the Omer is agriculture, right? We're counting the days of what's happening in the ground. And in fact, in Deuteronomy, one of the questions that the commentators ask is, well, wait, what if the day of the sickle is different? What if it's not the second day of Passover? Does that mean we start counting on a different time? But ultimately, the counting seems to be at least from Leviticus, with the purpose of bringing a sacrifice to God. Now, the thing is that when we get into Rabbinic Judaism, we no longer have a temple. So if we were to look at this as simply being about the sacrifices, then this whole practice, much like so much of other parts of Jewish life, would have gone away. There would have been nothing left once the temple was destroyed and we move into Rabbinic Judaism. And in fact, the rabbis say that's actually not true. That's where prayer comes in, that's where blessings come in, and that's where we create our structure around the formula of Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, blessed are you Adonai our God, which is a part of every blessing. And in the case of the counting of the Omer, is the positive commandments. So it gets Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav, that God has commanded us for these commandments. But still, like most of us aren't living according to the sacrifices or according to the land. And so we have to ask ourselves, so what's deep, what's more than this, right? Likewise, by the way, Shavuot, we know, was originally a sacrifice and an agricultural holiday. And the rabbis there too then ascribed Shavuot to being that time on which we celebrate the giving of the Torah, which of course implies also the receiving of Torah, which continues until today, which is what we're doing when we're studying together. If I were here and we could have this conversation live, I would ask you what else you notice in this these two verses. But I do want to point out one other thing, because it says Sheva Shabbatot Timimot, like 7 complete weeks, perfect weeks, full weeks. There's a lot of commentaries around what that means, what's happening when we count the time. And I want us to just think for a moment about the way we count time in our lives, not just with the Omer. We count time when we're excited about something. We count time when we're maybe dreading something, how long it's been since we lost a loved one, how many days, how many weeks, how many years. And there's this sense that also, whether it's those moments of joy or those moments of challenge, that time feels at once like really long and really short. And I think there's something to that the rabbis are trying to help us understand. So we're going to leap forward to the 20th century, and then we're going to go backwards to look at some other commentaries from the Middle Ages. But Rabbi Aryeh Carmel, who wrote a book called Master Plan, who he was a successful mortgage broker and real estate developer who also happened to be a rabbi. He lived in England, and he wrote several books in his spare time. And in that, he points out that the Omer on Pesach was from the barley harvest, right? Meaning the offering that was brought on Passover, on that second day of Passover, is from the barley, the stuff that's taken from barley. But the offering on Shavuot was of wheat. And barley is mainly food for animals, he said, while wheat is food for human beings. The Torah hints to us that the physical independence by itself still leaves man, from the Torah perspective, on the animal level. The counting of the 49 days signifies a sevenfold refining process and marks our progress to full human status with our acceptance of the Torah at Sinai, 7 weeks after the Exodus. So think about it, right? I mean, the people we've come out of slavery. That's what Pesach is all about. And the whole way in which we function in the world is much more on a physiological need basis. And what Rabbi Aryeh Carmel is telling us is that this time helps us to develop more of our own humanity, more of our own intellect, more of our own free will, more of our own imagination and creativity. And it's then that we come into our full human status. Now, I'm not sure maybe he means this in a literal way, but I read it a little bit more metaphorically. And in fact, it harkens me back to the idea that in the book of Exodus, the first mitzvah that we're all given collectively as a people is the mitzvah to count the months. As the people are preparing to leave Egypt, we're told to start counting time. And there, many of the commentators point out that this is the first step, the first act of freedom, the first act of human ability to make choices and make decisions. And I think that what Rabbi Carmel is adding to this is, first of all, he's linking the agriculture to our being in the world, right? So our connection as human beings, our human growth is directly connected to the land, to what we see happening in the land and the harvest, but also it's part of what happens for us, right? On Passover, we said we were as slaves who left Egypt. And this 7-week period of counting time, of really thinking about what time means, of where we are, of how to make sure that we know that it's this day and this week, right? Means that we're creating a mindset and manifesting meaning in time. Think about it, right? When we just kind of go about our day and don't think about it, we can lose sight of time, we can lose sight of meaning. And this is instead saying that part of this process is creating an intention around meaning, right? So I know for myself, every year, the first thing that I do before the Seders is that I put a reminder on my phone for every night at 10 o'clock for this period, so that I remember to count the Omer. Because it's really hard to be mindful of time. It's really hard to count time when it's not something that would just be automatic, right? If I had a family simcha coming up, or I had something in my life that I was really looking forward to, I would mark that time, maybe even mark off days on a calendar. And what this is saying is the Omer is our invitation to do similarly. Now, when we think about what that means to equate the counting of time to then Shavuot and to acceptance of Torah and what it means to be human, that's where we can go backwards in time to the Sefer HaChinuch, which was a 13th century work composed in Spain, which literally means the Book of Education. And it's a work which attempts to systematically discuss all 613 commandments from the Torah, and it was published anonymously. So we don't know who wrote it, but it's a big part of the Middle Ages and what we think of. And here, the Sefer HaChinuch says, since the acceptance of Torah was the goal of our redemption and serves as the foundation of the Jewish people, and through it we achieved our greatness, we're commanded to count from the day after the first day of Pesach until the day that the Torah was given. This manifests our great desire for that awesome day, and it continues on page 2, which our heart yearns for, just as a servant yearns for shade. If we can just keep moving the page down now. Thank you. We count constantly. When will the day come that we yearn for? The day that we left slavery. Because counting towards a certain date shows a person that all his desire and longing is to reach that time, right? We've gotten out of Egypt. We start counting. Well, you don't have to go down yet. We can stay on this text for a minute if we could on the sheet, right? So we've left slavery. We know what day that was. That was the first day of Passover, and now it's the second day of Passover, and we start counting. And what Sefer HaChinuch is saying is that this receiving of Torah, what we're doing tonight, when we stand in the middle of the night at the bottom of the mountain, and as the tradition tells us, like we're literally tachtit hahar, under the mountain, waiting for the receipt of Torah, that's an anticipation of great desire and longing, and is one that we need to be counting towards. We don't just show up at Mount Sinai, right? But we are counting. And not only that, it tells us that the revelation of Torah happens again and again and again. I want us to think about that. Torah is being revealed tonight. You're here maybe because this is what you do every year, maybe because you love studying, maybe because you like the conservative movement and love that we were offering this Tikkun. But from the standpoint of the tradition, we're here ready with our hands open, our hearts open, our heads open to receive Torah. That's an awesome, awesome experience. And it's really, if you think about it, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? And just like a wedding or a funeral or a bar mitzvah, we count the time. We count the time for that which is really beautiful and meaningful. And when we count time, we're actually thinking about what we need to do to get there. We're thinking about what's going to happen between now and that moment. We're thinking about who's going to be there. We're thinking about what we might wear. We're thinking about how we might show up. So I want us to think about that for a moment, right? Think for yourself tonight. Who's with you standing at Mount Sinai, whether they're physically with you or they're across the world? Who's standing with you in this moment? Whose words have been revealed to you that give you meaning in your life? How are you showing up? What's the Torah that you need to hear? Right, in the book of Ecclesiastes, we say there's a time for every season has a time. The birds turned it into a song. There's a time to live and a time to die, a time to laugh and a time to cry. And it goes on, right? And in this moment, it's as if we're saying, standing here at the foot of the mountain, we're asking ourselves, this moment is what for me? What's the time? What's the Torah you need in this moment that you're counting towards? Even if you haven't been counting the Omer for the last 50 days, you have a few hours, because it's told that it's in the midnight hours that the Torah is going to be revealed. So as you stand here, we think about, like, what's that Torah that's waiting for you? And Rambam, Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, had a really profound statement. And I want to just tell you one thing about the Guide for the Perplexed before we read the text, because usually when we study Maimonides, we're probably more often studying from the Mishnah Torah, the statements of law, the statements of how to. And that was written for Maimonides for the masses. But this, the Guide for the Perplexed, which was his philosophical work, he actually wrote for one person, for his grandson. And in that, I just love that he wrote an entire doctrine for one person. It's as if that was the Torah he was trying to pass on to his grandson. But in that, he says, Shavuot is the time of the giving of the Torah. In order to honor and elevate this day, we count the days from previous festival until it arrives, like someone who is waiting for a loved one to arrive, who counts the days by the hours. right? So I want to ask us to just think about these texts, this text from the Sefer HaChinuch and this text from Rambam. And what's the purpose of counting, right? When are the times in our lives that we count up? When do we count down, right? And we think of when we're waiting for, something blast off, we count down. Okay? And yet, when we have a simcha, we're often counting. When we have a family joy, we're often counting the number of days until it happens, and then it happens, and it feels like it was like 5 minutes. Or for some of you, perhaps for whether it was Passover or today for the holiday, you spent hours and hours counting the minutes that you cooked, and it's going to be eaten in 10 minutes. And I think what these texts are offering us is a way of saying that counting matters, because it's in the counting that we not only mark minutes, but then we create intentions. We think about what that moment that we're counting towards will really look like. What will I take away from it? What will it mean? How will I be different because I experienced it, right? And I want to just ask us, I know that there have been many people during this time of COVID who have been counting the number of minutes, the number of days, the number of weeks, the number of months that they've been in their homes. And it's interesting to me that we're in many parts of the country, we're starting to come out of that after these 15 months. And we're starting to come out right during this period when we're counting time. And so I want to ask you to think about, like, how has counting that time changed you in this past year? How have the moments that you've marked differently made your life more meaningful? We have plenty of ways we can talk about how it's made it more challenging. But what's the part of counting these moments that you take with you into moving out into the world? I know that some of people may not be with us on screen tonight because they're actually back at an in-person Tikkun. They're back in their home communities for the first time. And they've been longing for that and counting the moments till they can do that. And I think the Torah is telling us that's part of desire and longing. And that's part of our spiritual being. And it's also, I think, the sign of true freedom. Because what it's saying is that freedom teaches us that we have possibility. Imagine, right? Before the second night of Passover, when we're still in slavery, the idea that we can not only count time, but that we can have any ability to determine what our own time will look like is something that slaves don't get to do. Time is determined for them. And maybe, although it's sometimes hard to imagine what it was like to be a slave, thousands and thousands of years ago, we know that we sometimes become enslaved to our own things in life. And I think that the tradition is saying to us, when we're able to start counting time, when we're able to act with that freedom and that ability to think creatively, we're acknowledging that the world is full of possibility, that the world is full of revelatory experiences and opportunities. And ultimately, that's when we're able to open ourselves up to Torah. Because after all, Torah is supposed to change us. Torah is supposed to challenge us. Torah is supposed to remind us that we're living in a world where we're interconnected to each other, and where the fact that I live or you live and that we live side by side actually matters. And I want to just share with you, as we start to conclude, a poem that is really by a colleague, Stacy Zimmick Robinson, who wrote it for counting the Omer. But even as we are at the end of the Omer, I think it still is so valid, and I wanted to share it with you tonight. Because she says, count your things, add them up, amass a pile of more. Grab and gather in 49 steps the first of your herd, your hoard, your heart. Count them in countless succession, all your best, your hopes, your sins. Fill your tent, load the baskets and bags with counting and counted riches that smell of excess and succulent ripeness. A bursting of ready, sweet and sour and sharp all at once on your tongue. Count them all, gather them up. Breathe in 7 breaths of 7 and lay them at the waiting altar that stands in the shadow of God. Lay your counted glory there, an offering, a psalm of blessing and hopeful benediction. Lay it all down and fly. And as the psalmist teaches us, teach us to count our days rightly, that we may obtain a wise heart. And I share that with us because I think that when we're able to count the Omer and count this time towards Shavuot, what we're really saying is that we want to count every single day and make every single day count in our lives and in the lives of all those whom we touch. And so I want to wish you a Chag Sameach, and I want to wish you a day and evening of great learning and great opening and opportunity and possibility for Torah to be received in your hands and in your heart. Chag Sameach.
Rabbi Peretz, thank you so much. What a beautiful teaching. It brings great meaning to the period leading up to this evening and now to the extensive anticipation we have as we're heading towards our reading tomorrow and our re-experience of the giving of the Torah itself, Matan Torah. And, I'm just wondering, how do you think COVID has framed something different in terms of Torah? How has your Torah changed? What's been revealed to you over the past year or so?
It's really a great question. And I have to say, I purposely chose to teach in this time slot because it felt like, I know people are joining us from all over the world, but certainly in the US, it was just as Chag was coming in on the East Coast, not yet here on my coast. And just this idea of still counting towards felt really important. And I think for me, I am a person who receives Torah meaning, connection, through my interactions with other people and through the communal celebrations. And I think that Torah this year has been an individual process, whether that's more books I've read or even the experience of this, which feels so unnatural to be talking at people when I'm a person who talks to people. And so I'm learning to do new things, right? That itself is Torah. And although I get to see you, and that makes everything worth it for me, because both it's another face and it's a face of a good friend. But I think that I'm challenged to have my own thoughts and not just feed off of everyone else's, and to hear the Torah that's being said to me.
That is very powerful. It's interesting. Yes, we've spent more time on our own and perhaps with our own thoughts in many ways. And maybe that sense of personal revelation is something we can take. I know for many people I speak with, including myself, it has been a year of clarity, of clarity gained. What's really important in my life? Who are the important relationships in my life? What are some of the hopes and expectations that I really want to bring into my life? I love the way I felt real connection to the texts that you brought with us that talk about this sense of expectation between Passover and Shavuot. That sense that sense of optimism that is truly Jewish, I think, and that has really, I think, for me, I've been reconnected to over the past year. So
I'll just say one last thing. I know we have to go on, but I have really also had a profound revelation this year of just how fortunate I am despite all the challenges. And when you know that other people struggle, not that I want them to struggle, but to know that no matter what has happened, I'm incredibly blessed and incredibly fortunate, has gotten me through every single day of this time. And that's also a Torah. So thank you.
That sense of counting blessings along with counting our days. It's a beautiful way to end this teaching. And so Rabbi Peretz, thank you very much. What a beautiful opportunity to be with you. And I'm looking forward to being with you in about a week for the ordination of our new colleagues. So I'm looking forward to that as well.
Excellent.
Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. Hi, Donna.
And with that, we'll turn to our next scholar. First of all, I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Rabbi Jacob Blumenthal, serve as the CEO of the Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. And I just want to take just a brief moment to welcome everybody, wish everybody who has joined us, and there are hundreds from across the world who are with us this moment, to wish you all a Chag Sameach. And also just to say a quick thank you to those who made this evening possible, those who helped to sponsor and partner with us to bring this program together for Erev Shavuot and for Shavuot itself. And also to thank Rabbi Alana Garber and other members of the staff of the Rabbinical Assembly and all of our teachers and presenters who are with us over the course of 24 hours. It is a huge project. And I have to say, when I've looked at the materials and as I've been tuning in and listening, it's just an incredible range of Torah with really wonderful speakers and presenters.